Oh, hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to this year's Conservative Party conference. To introduce myself, I'm Charlotte Gill, the Deputy Editor of ConservativeHome, and I'm delighted to be here hosting the first of our events at ConservativeHome in partnership with Heathrow. Today I'll be in conversation with Steve Barclay, Chief Secretary to the Treasury and previously Secretary of State for Executive EU. We'll be looking at the latest plans in government, from the current coronavirus measures to the economic revival, and what role aviation can play within it, as well as the government's latest progress on Brexit. But before that, may I welcome John Holland-Kaye, CEO of Heathrow and also Chair of the Business in the Community Employment and Skills Leadership Team, who's going to offer some opening remarks. So take it away, John.
Well, thank you, Charlotte, and welcome, Steve, and everyone. It's slightly strange to be here without it being 11 o'clock on a Sunday night with a glass of wine in our hands, but this is a special event. And I just want to say how much we want to support the government to deliver its vision and how Heathrow is here to serve Britain. We're going to help you deliver a zero-carbon economy. Heathrow and the UK aviation industry are leading the way for a global agreement on decarbonising aviation by 2050. And this government has a unique opportunity to make this a flagship goal of COP26 next year, and we will help you to bring the rest of the world on board. And the key to decarbonising long-haul flight is to move from fossil fuels to sustainable aviation fuel, made from waste or from hydrogen and captured carbon. And SAF is a sunrise export industry, which can bring tens of thousands of skilled jobs where they're needed most, to regenerate parts of the north, Scotland and Wales, tying together the union and creating a multi-billion-pound export industry in which Britain can lead the world. And there's more we can do to level up. Let's make sure that every part of Britain will have access to the UK's hub airport without needing to get into a car, by building western and southern rail links into Heathrow. And let's guarantee that for those parts of the country that can't get to Heathrow by rail, we guarantee they have flights in perpetuity. These are places like Belfast, Aberdeen, Inverness, so that investors in those markets have confidence they will never be cut off from the world, or even worse, made to fly through France to get there. And of course, we are essential to global Britain. We're the UK's only hub and best connected airport in the world. We provide the trading arteries that carry 40% of Britain's exports to global markets. And we carry an even bigger proportion of service exports, as well as bringing in tourists, students, and inward investors. But our position is under threat as Paris and Frankfurt grow and as Heathrow is constrained. A strong independent Britain needs to control its own trade routes. And we will need as many flights from Heathrow to India and China, the economic centres of the 21st century, as we have today to the US, if we're going to avoid British exports going through Paris or Frankfurt to get to global markets. So let's help you to deliver on global Britain by making Heathrow the world's biggest and best hub airport. But if we're going to get there, the UK aviation sector needs to survive COVID. Aviation is the lifeblood of the UK economy, but we are ourselves on life support. We don't need bailouts, we just need this government to allow COVID-free passengers from markets like the US to travel again by testing to make sure they don't have the disease. And the best solution is for testing and quarantine to take place before people fly. And the UK can take a lead in establishing a common international standard, piloting pre-departure testing between London and New York, the busiest route in the world. And in the meantime, we can reduce the quarantine period for arriving passengers from other high-risk countries who test negative for COVID after 5 days. Let's get our economy moving again. So we're here to serve Britain. We'll help you to deliver your vision. And now I'd like to hand back to Charlotte and to Steve. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, John, and hello to you both again. So, Steve, let's start off by talking a bit about the current coronavirus measures and what's happening with testing at the moment. I read recently that Boris Johnson is aiming for the end of October to get airport testing up and running. Do you know what the latest with that is?
Yeah, I'll come on to that. But first, I hugely appreciate the sentiments that John has set out. And I think in his remarks, you can see a number of the absolutely central priorities of the government. Net zero, levelling up, making the most of our R&D and how we use that to support key sectors of the economy, being a global Britain, maximising the trade potential that we have as we take back control of our own trade policy. And we saw that with the deal that Liz Truss struck with the Japanese, and obviously potential for many more to come. So we're very excited about the potential to work with Heathrow, to work with the aviation sector, and we recognise its strategic importance to us as an economy. And as John said, it's not about the bailouts, it's about issues such as testing. And you're quite right, Charlotte, to start with that. I think it's the key priority within the sector at the moment. I am expecting Grant Shapps and Matt Hancock to say more about this in the coming days. But from a Treasury point of view, the sort of things you would expect us to be looking at is what testing can we have at airports and how does that interact with the quarantine rules? What is best in class internationally? So if we look, for example, at some of the German states where they are using testing to then release earlier from some of the restrictions. So what is it that we can do on partnerships? The US being a key route there. So what agreements can we reach with our friends in the US on that? Can we look at things around subnational travel? What are the specific issues for business travel, distinct from the wider market? So there's a number of issues within the wider question of testing. But the point that I'd say to John and the industry this morning is we're acutely aware, both in the Treasury and across government, that this is a key issue within the sector. I know Grant has been engaging extensively with the industry on this, and I hope that the government will be in a position to say more about this in the coming days.
Okay, and you know, because one story I read last night was about a company called Collinson's, for instance, and they talked about subsidising the government's testing programme with their own system that people can pay for. Do you know how much that could be done, I guess, in other industries as well? They've said that they could produce 24,500 tests per day, but apparently it hasn't been properly considered yet. So I just wondered if we could see more of these kind of offers coming through.
Yeah, well, I mean, through COVID, which Michael Gove chairs and which I sit on behalf of the Treasury and obviously other colleagues in government, Hancock for Health and so forth, we look at what are the opportunities on testing. Dido Harding obviously has a comprehensive programme where we've allocated a very significant envelope of funding to support that work. And there's a whole range of technologies coming on stream. Now, the question then is what are the constraints? So is it the workforce constraints in some of our labs? Is it proving that the new tests are not generating too many false positives? You know, it's the detail beneath each of the technologies. So it's a question of looking at each of those. We have a team obviously going through that, through the advice that the CMO, the Chief Medical Officer, provides. But there's a huge push within government to ramp up our capacity across testing. You'll have seen, Charlotte, the Prime Minister's set some ambitious targets for us to meet, the most immediate one being 500,000 tests a day by the end of October. But within that, we've also seen flexibility, for example, around elite sport, how they've used testing to facilitate bringing some of their activity back. So these are very live conversations. I know John will have been discussing it with Grant Shapps and DFT colleagues. I think the key message I wanted to make from a Treasury point of view is we absolutely hear the industry in terms of saying this is a key priority for them, and DFT colleagues are engaged heavily on it. Okay,
because it seems to me that a lot of the testing focus has been about schools and PPE, and maybe it's been a bit neglected overall. For such a big industry, aviation, I think it's something, it supports over 230,000 jobs directly and more than 1 million jobs indirectly. And it feels as if it hasn't maybe got as much attention as others. Would you say that's a fair criticism? Or?
No, I wouldn't, because I think the key focus actually has been on NHS workers and the care home sector. And for the capacity we've got, that's been the key first priority that we've targeted rather than schools. There's other sectors which are also important. So you tend to get less media focus, for example, on prisons, but actually ensuring that our prisons are safe. We've been very successful. Robert Buckland's been extremely successful so far in terms of avoiding some of the outbreaks that we've seen in other countries in terms of prison testing and the controls we put in place. So the point is, the key is there's many areas where we need to increase our testing, and the Prime Minister is absolutely focused on that. The whole of government is working to ramp up our testing capacity. Within the Treasury, we, the Chancellor and I, have allocated the funding to do that, and it's a question now really operationally for how quickly Dido Harding and the team can actually deliver that. But you're right, it's important in aviation, but actually it's important across the whole economy.
Okay. And moving on to a more general coronavirus-related matter, I just wondered if you could, it seemed to me last week there was a very long debate about the measures. It seemed to me that there were shifts in position, people talking about Sweden and Desmond Swain talking about Project Fear. I just wondered, do you feel since the beginning of the crisis that there's been, especially with the Brady Amendment being floated, do you think that there's been a change in mood amongst Conservative MPs as to how to manage it?
No, I think it reflects the fact that we've now been living with the virus for more than 6 months, and we're going through the phases. And we see that likewise in our economic response. Our initial economic response was all about how do we ensure people can stay at home, protect the NHS whilst we build up that capacity. And you saw with the Winter Plan for Jobs from the Chancellor last week how our approach then is moving to the second phase, which is the focus on jobs that are viable, but supporting in particular the skills package to ensure people aren't out of the labour market for a longer period of time. I think what Sir Graham was flagging is a point that the government agrees with, which is it is important that Parliament has a voice. We have been working at pace within government, and a lot of the time decisions have been taken at pace. So I recall, for example, when the quarantine was put in on Spain, the criticism being it was announced too quickly. Then just the week or so later, it was, well, are we moving quickly enough on other matters? So to some extent, you know, one lobby group will say we're too fast, another lobby group will say we're too slow. But it is important that Parliament has a voice. Prime Minister has been clear on that, and that's exactly the approach we're keen to take. Okay,
and it's been said as part of the Brady Amendment and the compromise that was reached. It said that if we get offered a second national lockdown, MPs will now be able to vote on this. If we got to next week and say cases went up to what they are in March, how do you think MPs would vote?
Well, firstly, we don't want another lockdown, and all the measures we're taking, all the funding we in the Treasury are signing off is to put in place things like the track and trace, the COVID secure measures, to ensure that we don't need to have another full lockdown. And in fact, our approach is about having a tiered response, which allows us to be targeted. And likewise for John and sectors like aviation, that is important in terms of enabling businesses to operate, but in a COVID way, and having measures that are targeted more at the social interaction rather than the costly economic impacts which the first lockdown had. So we're learning about the virus. Our approach therefore naturally evolves with that. We want to avoid a full lockdown, and that's why we're taking the measures that we are.
Do you think that some of the national measures, for example, that they're being applied, well, obviously they're being applied throughout the country, so if they're applied in a region with very low cases, say they have to put up with curfews, do you think that's working? Do you think that's viable as a sustainable system?
Well, it's about balance, Charlotte, and I think what the data, as we learn from the virus, we learn what is working and what needs to evolve. And one of the concerns of the medical experts was that compliance with COVID-safe practices was much stronger at the start of an evening than at the end, that people congregating at a bar was more of a risk than those sitting at a restaurant table. So it's about having targeted measures and learning from them. So, for example, taking it to a different form of transport, but we put in certain social distancing rules on trains. One of the things I'm keen that we learn on as we move forward is what is happening with air travel and what data can we learn from that can then inform what is necessary for social distancing on trains, and how can that evolve? So the point with hospitality is we're taking targeted measures to support that sector. It was massively impacted by COVID. 1.4 million of the 2.4 million in the sector were furloughed. A big concentration of young people in that sector where the economic scarring is very hard. That's why the Chancellor has put in the targeted measures, the VAT cut, and then extended that, the Eat Out to Help Out scheme and so forth. But at the same time, we've got to look where are the areas where the risk is greatest. And if the medical advice is that's late at night, once people have had some drinks, they're at the bar, that's why then a more targeted approach has been taken.
Okay. There's a recent report, though, that says that we're looking at, if they continue, we're looking about a quarter of pubs to close next year and 290,000 job losses. Do you think that the balance, that makes the balance right for this virus, or do you think those are very big figures from Oxford Economics?
Sure. Well, I mean, the Chancellor has been very honest, firstly, in that, regrettably, we won't be able to save every job as a consequence of the pandemic, notwithstanding the very large fiscal measures that we're taking. But I think most of the advice, the OBR, the Bank of England and others, have said that the action we have taken with things like the furlough has helped save many jobs. More than half of those that were on furlough have come back into their jobs. And the whole strategy behind the £30 billion plan for jobs in July and the winter plan that the Chancellor set out in the House last week is all about how do we safeguard those jobs that are viable. And that won't be all the jobs within the hospitality sector, but what we're doing is responding to industry, we're listening, we're engaging widely. The Chancellor is engaging not just with the CBI and the business groups, but also with the trade unions as well, to ensure that what are very expensive schemes that we're putting in place and have a big fiscal cost to the taxpayer are targeted so that we save the most jobs that we can. So there will be, as the OBR central assumption shows, there will be suddenly an increase in unemployment. But I think had we not taken the measures that the Chancellor has taken, that increase in unemployment would have been far greater.
Okay. And obviously the furlough scheme is coming to a close at the end of this month. What are you expecting? Have you made additional preparations? Obviously there's the job subsidy scheme, but what sort of figures are you looking at for that?
Well, the OBR has put out figures, and one can look at their central assumptions. The Bank of England forecast in August came in below that, 7.5% as a central assumption. The key thing, though, you mentioned the job support. So firstly, what the Chancellor set out was the job support, but what people tend to forget is in the summer he also set out the furlough bonus. And I think the key thing is looking at the impact of both. And so it is the furlough bonus combined with the job support that will help as many employers as possible retain that link. But at the same time, not just from a financial point of view, and as Chief Secretary of the Treasury who looks at the total amount that we're spending, one's got to be realistic about that, but also actually for people's welfare. To say, as some did, simply keep extending the furlough, what they never fully explained to me was for how long. Are they saying they want to extend it until there's a vaccine? Well, for HIV, we don't have a vaccine, so how long are they going to extend it? Then when you ask that to them, they tend to say, well, make it targeted. Well, targeted to which sectors? And then within those sectors, what about the supply chains? Are you saying you're going to support those supply chains? Because obviously the supply chains interact across different sectors. So the point was the furlough was the initial response to retain that link between the employee and their business so that viable businesses can bounce back. And that has worked in large measure. But it is right that now, as we're more than 6 months in, and as we see that we're going to be living with the virus for longer than we initially feared in March and April, then it's right on behalf of the taxpayer that we evolve the scheme, but actually it's right for the employee as well. Because there is a point where if you're out of the labour market for a very long time, that is not good for you either, whether that's on furlough or being unemployed. And one of the key things strategically that we're trying to do in the Treasury is not just mitigate how many people are unemployed, but in particular how long they're unemployed for. because a lot of the data shows it's the length of time a young person is unemployed that has the real economic scarring impact. And that's really the strategy behind the plan for jobs in the summer. The doubling of work coaches, the tripling of traineeships, the £2,000 for apprentices, the £2 billion on the Kickstart scheme. It's all about saying, how do we ensure people aren't out of the labour market for a long period of time, get the skills training in for them? And then your question might then be, well, where are the jobs? And that's why the Prime Minister announced the acceleration of the infrastructure programs. John mentioned some of the green and net zero opportunities, where there's opportunities for jobs, the decarbonisation, for example, of public sector buildings. So those are the jobs we're accelerating. We're bringing that infrastructure investment forward, but we're ensuring we've got the skills so that where someone's job isn't viable, we ensure they're not out of the labour market for a long period of time.
Okay, so we're getting some questions in now, so I'll start to go through these. So the first one is from Freddie Tyzak, and he asks, the events industry is worth over 45 billion to the UK. Why is there not a targeted approach to this sector?
Well, I answered that earlier when I said, well, how long, when you say targeted, how long would that entail extending it for? Are we saying that is extended until we have a vaccine, because that does not have a fixed end date? It's not good for people to be out of the labour market for an indefinite period of time. So where we can provide support, we will do, and we're doing that in a targeted way. And all sectors, don't forget, benefit from the comprehensive package that we've put in place. So the tax deferrals, the loans, business rate support. You know, there's a wider package beyond furlough. And again, quite often, the public narrative is almost as if the only scheme that the Chancellor has announced is the furlough scheme, when actually there's a much wider package of support, including on tax deferrals and loans and measures to support cash flow. So all industries benefit from that central package. The question in terms of then extending the furlough would be, well, for how long for the marketing industry, and which sectors, and what about the supplies to those sectors? And that's why we've done it in a more targeted way.
Okay. And Tom from the Good Things Foundation says, COVID has stressed how important digital skills are for the economy. How do we ensure the 9 million people who can't use the internet without help aren't left behind?
It's a really good question, because one of the things that excites me is drawing the lessons from COVID. So from a Treasury point of view, COVID has come at a very significant cost to the Exchequer. But at the same time, what are the opportunities to reform? What are the opportunities to do things better? And then within that, quite rightly, as the question says, we need to ensure that everyone is able to benefit from that. And that is part of our wider agenda of levelling up. So I'll give you an example, Charlotte. When we went into COVID, around 3% of GP surgeries were offering appointments online. Now it's over 90%. So you can see a significant shift. Now, if you look at that more widely within the NHS, what are the other services that we can offer to scale through online platforms where it's better for the patient, but also is better from a health productivity point of view? How can we work differently as a result of COVID? If I look at, for example, the shielding program we put in place, when very successfully Rob Jenrick pulled together a program to get food parcels to those who were clinically most vulnerable. You know, what are the lessons from that we can take from government, and how then do we support that cohort medically and learn the lessons as a result of what we saw with COVID? So there's the opportunity digitally to do things better as a result of the COVID pandemic. But part of that, I recognise, is ensuring that everyone is able to participate in it.
Okay. And in terms of, obviously the NHS has digitised a lot more, what changes do you think that COVID's brought for the economy and how things are run, maybe working from home? What do you think is here to stay? And how can the government support it more?
Yeah, well, I think firstly, if I apply it within government, I feel we have a overly concentrated civil service in London. I think we're London-centric still. And the Prime Minister has a strong commitment to ensure that the civil service is better spread across the country. So one of the things I'm working through the CSR with Lord Agnew on is not just within Whitehall departments, so within the Treasury and Northern Campus, and progressing that. The base in Edinburgh that Alistair Jack has been leading on. But also more widely, how do we ensure that arm's length bodies, officials currently based in London, senior civil servants, not just the more junior teams, but across all levels of the civil service, are actually spread geographically across the UK. And so I think that would have been more difficult before COVID. But now people over the last number of months have got used to working more flexibly. They've got used to working online and having their meetings online. I think that programme is easier to deliver than it would have been a year ago.
Okay. Because the government has been trying to also get people back to offices. So even if you do park offices in different places now, it seems to me that like people are just so comfortable working from home at the moment. Do you think the government will have to backtrack on its overall aim to open up offices again?
I think, firstly, the government was recognising there's a massive hit to city centres, and you would be the first, understandably, to call us to account if we simply ignore that, and the Prime Minister was reflecting the fact that there is that pressure. But within that, businesses will always take the decisions that's right for their shareholders and for their employees. And I was learning yesterday, one of the biggest employers across the Eastern region is telling its workforce that they're not going to be back 5 days a week. They're going to make working flexibly and not actually having a desk assigned to an individual a permanent practice. So we will see businesses react in different ways. Some businesses will go back and operate as they did before. Others will embrace different models. I think that's for the business community, not government, to dictate to them. But within government itself, if I give you an example, HMRC, with around 80% of its staff working from home, delivered in record time the IT systems for the furlough and the self-employed income support scheme. And again, I think as someone looking at costs within Whitehall, it would be remiss of Lord Agnew or myself to ignore the lessons that offers and to be saying, well, we'll continue to have, for example, expensive office estate in Covent Garden, when actually we can look at firstly how we're operating as a business, as a civil service, but also the locations as to where staff are. Because I think once you shift the locations, it's not just how people work, it's also the talent pool that you can attract. And as someone from Lancashire, I'm very keen that our civil service is attracting talent from all over the country. I don't buy the fact that you have to come into London in order to work in the very top echelon of the civil service. We should be much more encouraging of a diverse and wider geographic model, and that's something I'm very keen to push.
Okay. And in terms of moving on to slightly Treasury-related measures, obviously the autumn budget has been postponed, but we can look forward to the spending review shortly. Can you give us any idea of what to expect in that?
Well, it's a key focus of mine, as you would imagine, at the moment. And so Secretaries of States have submitted their bids into the Treasury for the CSR. I am in discussions. In fact, after this session, I'll be speaking to a number of colleagues over the course of the day on that. So that process within government is well underway. The Prime Minister being clear that we won't have a return, as he put it, to austerity. But we do need to look closely at our spending in light of the amount that we're spending on COVID and work with departments to ensure that we maximise value for money. And as someone who spent 4 years on the Public Accounts Committee, I'm very clear that we can deliver more value for money in government programmes. I had 4 years looking at National Audit Office reports that was a pretty good signpost to the opportunities to deliver better. And I know, chatting with Cabinet colleagues, that is something they recognise and support. But we need to do that in a way that is also true to our commitments at the general election. And what you saw last night, Charlotte, was the flagship announcement from the Prime Minister on 40 hospitals, new hospitals being built. And I think, he said he'd get Brexit done. He got Brexit done. He said we would commit to 40 new hospitals. That was announced last night. So notwithstanding the many challenges that COVID has brought, we are still delivering on our key flagship manifesto commitments. And that was or will be the biggest investment in hospitals in a generation. And, for those of us as Conservatives who at every election have been told by Labour that there's 24 hours to save the NHS, what the announcement last night shows, what the support we have put in place for the NHS during COVID shows, is the Conservative Party backs the NHS. Absolutely. The Chancellor said he would do whatever is needed to support our NHS. And I think Conservative members watching this can take huge pride in the fact that at its time of need, the Conservative Party has stood with our NHS, has financially backed it to the hilt. And I think the announcement from the Prime Minister last night reinforces that message that the Conservatives back our NHS and fund it, as he showed with that announcement.
Okay. Given that Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson are so against austerity, where is because you say you're going to cut costs in different places by looking at the audits, but where is the money actually going to come from? Who's going to be paying the most tax? How's that all going to work? How are you going to avoid austerity?
So, well, you're not going to get me to preempt the budget. No Treasury Minister, Charlotte, is going to do that. But I mean, in short, there's no secret answer to these things. It's always from a combination of how much growth we can get into the economy. And then within that, what is the borrowing, what is the spending, and what is the tax ratio within that? And that's what the budget will cover. And the key focus from a Treasury point of view is always how do you get the most growth into the economy possible? And, again, where we have made big spending decisions, such as on the furlough, such as on the cash support to businesses through loans, tax deferrals, the cost of not doing so would have been far greater. The economic scarring would have been greater. And so what that has enabled is more of our businesses to come back post-COVID and to enable them to accelerate as we go forward. So the key to it will obviously be getting a vaccine. And that is why we've got the Vaccine Task Force focused on doing that. And globally, the UK is at the front of the pack on securing that in terms of the portfolio of vaccine programs that we're engaged in. So the vaccine will be key to our economic recovery, but the measures we're taking have reduced the economic scarring we would otherwise have faced. But clearly at the budget, we will need to set out the position for that longer term fiscal sustainability. And that's what the Chancellor's been clear he will do.
Do you think there's too much, because we hear a lot about the vaccine and our plan seems to be modelled around waiting for it. But what if it takes over, say, 2 years? Because clearly it's going to take a lot of time to get approved, surely. So we say we can't continue furloughing indefinitely, but a lot of people will be thinking there's a parallel with that in lockdown. We can't continue doing lockdowns indefinitely with the hope of the vaccine.
Well, you're right that we can't guarantee that the vaccine is going to arrive at a particular point. And in essence, that was the point I was making as to why we needed to evolve our approach from the phase 1, which was the furlough, into the phase 2, which is the mix of support for viable jobs, coupled with skills and training and support and acceleration of programs such as Net Zero, our R&D investment, our infrastructure in roads and rail, our High Speed 2, for example, the Northern Powerhouse work, in order to unlock the new jobs. And we need to do that as we learn to live with the vaccine, because as the Prime Minister has set out, we are going to be living with it for longer than we hoped, for at least the next 6 months. And you're right, it could be longer. We don't know. So we need to ensure that our businesses can operate in a COVID-safe way. That where we take interactions, we do it on a targeted basis. And that's why Matt Hancock has set out the 3-tiered approach so that we can be much more targeted in our interventions. But at the same time, when a vaccine is found, we need to ensure that the UK is at the front of the pack. And that's behind the funding that the Treasury has allocated to ensure that we are.
Cool. So don't mind if I just hop about with questions, because we've got some more questions coming in, and one goes back to aviation. So Emma Wade asks, alongside testing and a fully regionalised quarantine policy, will the Treasury consider an APD holiday to boost demand for travel to cover summer 2021?
Yeah, well, we said at the budget, the Chancellor said at the budget that we would consult on APD, and obviously there's an interaction with the end of the transition around that, so he's considering the timing of that, but we're given that commitment. It's unclear to me whether, when people say about APD in terms of current travel, I think the bigger impediment is concern with COVID rather than price necessarily. So I think that tends to be more the driver. But the argument around APD, for me, is much more closely linked to the union argument and our commitment to strengthen the union. So looking at what is the position on domestic flights, particularly the return leg, it's something Northern Ireland ministers and Northern Ireland MPs have raised with myself and colleagues. So I think there's a consideration of what is the interaction with the union. We are very committed through the work that Michael Gove is doing to strengthening the union of the United Kingdom. We as a Conservative Party are the Conservative Party of the union, Conservative and Unionist party. So it is right that we look at that, but it needs to be in the round. And obviously, as with your last question, you're asking about affordability. So this is why these things need to be considered in the round, but the Chancellor's been clear, we will consult on it, and we've made that commitment.
Okay, and just having a look through the question. So William A. Hawley says, internet speeds are important to be able to work from home. You really need fibre. Are there infrastructure plans to improve the quality of home connections?
Yes, yeah, in short. So when people say politicians don't answer the question, we can be absolutely clear on that, Charlotte. So we've got 5 billion in particular that's been allocated to target the 20% hardest to reach areas. And I think COVID has reinforced. So I will discuss with Oliver Dowden in the context of the comprehensive spending review what are his priorities around fibre and broadband and the wider package of measures that he may want to bring forward. But I think what COVID has highlighted and the question brings out in terms of people working more from home is the importance of those connections. And I represent a rural seat in the Fens. It won't surprise you, Charlotte, that the connectivity of some of my constituents is suboptimal. And therefore, as a constituency MP, I'm very alive to the fact that for those constituents working from home, they want to be able to ensure that they have the right speeds. But it's not just, I think, for work purposes. My children are a bit younger, but for anyone with sort of teenage children in particular, when you have numerous people in the household all using basically the broadband capacity in different ways, I think it becomes even more important that we're upgrading this and getting it into a better place. So absolutely right on the question. Is it a focus? Yes, it is. And it's something I know Oliver Dowden is very much prioritising.
Okay, and then what else? Xavier Woodward says free ports have created thousands of jobs in places like Dubai, Singapore, China, and the US. The UK could speed this policy up, which is already supported by PM ?
Yes, it is. I'm delighted actually that the issue of free ports has been brought up because you're absolutely right that it is an important policy. It's one actually the Chancellor led on within the party way before his time in the Treasury. So it is a key focus of the PM and the Chancellor. It's a key focus as a consequence of mine. I am leading within government on that. And so where we are on the free ports is we had the consultation February to July. It was slightly extended because of COVID to give areas sufficient time to respond. Very shortly, we'll be going back out with the response to that consultation, which will cover things such as what's the size of the outer boundary of the free port, what's the size of the tax area within the free port, and giving enough information for areas so that they can bring their consortiums together and get those bids in. So it is an area actually many of my colleagues are hugely interested in. So I've been doing quite a number of meetings, Zoom calls and online calls with MPs who are very interested in the potential of free ports. I think it's a hugely exciting opportunity, and it's one of those dividends that comes from Brexit and the greater freedom that we're going to have. So we're absolutely committed to free ports. That work is underway. It's making good progress, and I think there's great opportunities for levelling up as a result. And as I say, I think coming from just near Blackpool, you know, the levelling up agenda is like goes through like a stick of rock. It is absolutely at the core of what the CSR will be about and what the government is focused on. That's whether it touches on where officials are located and the reduction of the concentration on London, through to programmes such as free ports, ensuring that we level up, and free ports is a great policy opportunity to do so.
Okay. And Jason Woolacott asks, is there anything more that can be done to encourage people to set up new small businesses?
Yeah, so I think so one of the immediate questions that flows from that is, you know, how long does it take to set up a business and how do we speed that up? And that's one of the things that BEIS, I know, have been tasked with looking at. What is best in class internationally? What is it that the most business supportive countries do? Where are we in the global league tables around where there are measures around the ease of setting up businesses? So it's absolutely in the sweet spot of what BEIS have been tasked with doing, and that's part of a wider programme. So one of the programmes that the Chancellor leads on within government is what's called Project Speed, which is about saying, why do certain things take so long? And I'm sure many people watching will have their own examples of things that are hugely frustrating because they take too long. For me, for example, road schemes, from money being allocated from government to a digger actually arriving on site, currently just takes far too long. And we need to look at how we speed that up. So some of it is looking at the planning laws, some of it's looking at the over-reliance on endless reports from consultants, some of it is looking at what are the regulatory constraints, for example, around setting up a business, and how do we use those. So Project Speed is looking across the piece. How do we do things quicker? And setting a business up, excuse me, is a good example of that.
Okay. And obviously, Boris Johnson is making a massive shift away, and I imagine this fits into entrepreneurship as well, setting up small businesses. He's made a huge shift away from universities, which I personally think is very welcome, by the way, because it seems to me that they're just not, you know, an aggregate, that they're just not delivering overall. So I just wondered, what do you think that the economy is most demanding at the moment in terms of skill set, now that young people are looking for new opportunities? What do you see? Is it technology? Is it building? Is it...
Well, I think it's in green jobs, for example. So if I give a straightforward example, one of the areas we need to improve is housing. And heating within housing. So that might be more air source heat pumps. So do we have enough people qualified to install air source heat pumps? And what is our training programme to increase that? So you can look at what are the drivers from a net zero point of view. Housing is one, transport is another. So as we open up more railway, so you think of schemes such as the Oxford to Cambridge line, that gives us potential for housing linked to that. And within that, then I'm very keen on modern methods of construction. I find it odd that we're still building so many of our homes in ways very familiar to the Victorians. And why aren't we, as the Scandinavians, using more methods, modern methods of construction? It's much quicker on site. Our weather, you know, it snows, it rains, you know, why aren't we doing more of it in a factory with robots, and then having the skills programme to support that? Much more higher productivity, better skills, connect with the FE college. You then have all the environmental features designed in. You standardise, you do at scale. And if I look at the Department for Education, for example, over the last 7 years, they've brought the cost per square metre of a school down by a third. through using methods of construction. So one of the issues I'm driving through is how do we socialise that more widely across government in areas such as our hospitals that we announced last night. And that in turn will change what skills we need in our FE colleges. So infrastructure programmes, green jobs for net zero, thinking about our health and social care. So a lot of people have expressed an interest in training to join the NHS following COVID. So we've seen an increase in applications for nursing, for example. We know we need to do more within the social care sector. So looking at our skills there and how we have a ladder of opportunity. So if people start in one place within the health and social care, they're able to progress their career through rather than getting stuck at one level. So there's huge opportunities, but it is a change. And I think your point is, have we got too many people going to university on degrees that don't enhance their earning potential? And whilst there's a value in the experience of university, given the debt that then they accumulate, is that the best thing for them? Or are there better routes through apprenticeships, through training that we can offer? And that's part of the shift that the PM was signaling. Okay.
You brought up, so you talked about house building and the importance of infrastructure. And I know the government, I mean, as a millennial, I was very excited to hear that the government really wants to go for it on the housing front. The algorithm, it's been a little bit controversial that's being used. Neil O'Brien criticised it, he analysed it on our site. I just wondered, what are your thoughts on it? Because I imagine it must be quite hard to strike a balance on where to build. But what's the latest on that? And do you think that this is going to be another Tory rebellion?
Well, I think there's a number of issues within it. So I think first, the key is objections usually start with poor quality housing. So people usually tend to be much more critical of housing of poorer quality than good quality, which is why I'm very focused on things like MMC. Secondly, there's a question, are you using your housing funding in areas where the housing is most expensive? Or are you combining it, for example, with the transport and looking, so where are you locating? If I take my area, are you looking to build in Cambridge? Or are you looking to connect from Cambridge to satellite areas around Cambridge and use transport connectivity to somewhere like Waterbeach? So there's questions around where we're building. I'm very clear with colleagues, we need to build more and we need to build more housing. And we can't simply say, I can't say as someone who has a house, that I'm against more house building. I think that's completely wrong. We need more house building. Because too many people are having to wait much longer into their, not just their 20s, but into their 30s before they can get on the housing ladder. And as a Conservative Party, we support people getting their own house. So we need to build more, and we should be unashamed about that. But we need to build good quality housing, and we need it to be in areas which deliver for that wider quality of life so people can get into work effectively. So I think that's where we are. In terms of where the parliamentary party is and the algorithm, the point I would make is it's a consultation. So, for example, if I take my own area, about 83% of Fenland is classified as a floodplain 2 and 3. So clearly when we're discussing the algorithm, we will need to understand how local factors are weighted, and that's the whole purpose of the consultation is to flush out these issues. So it's not an end product, it's part of identifying where we can build, but then it's important that we accelerate that building and do it quickly.
Okay, and talking of the algorithm, it's not the first time in recent times that the government has used an algorithm. We saw with the A-level results. How commonplace are these algorithms? And, a lot of people said that from looking at both of them, that they're not the right way to govern. What's your view on that?
Well, I think with all technology, it depends firstly on the data that goes in and how it's used. So they have their place, but it's then depends on the application. So one of the things we have done in the Treasury is I brought a data team in to the Treasury because I'm keen that we move from an era of spreadsheets and data coming in very slowly, usually from arm's length bodies that are not particularly visible in real time to decision makers at the centre, and so that we can actually see much quicker what is happening. So in fact, you mentioned housing, I think there's scope for us to improve the quality and the timeliness of data that comes in from bodies such as Homes England. The Chancellor has allocated £12 billion to the Affordable Homes Programme. What is the data? What are the software systems that we are using to track that, and then to be able to have conversations with local authorities as to where the blockages are. Now, the data software, and I've been doing a whole series of calls with data firms, the data software to enable those conversations often runs off algorithms, but it's to then facilitate the conversation where you flush out with the local authority, well, what is the issue that means that you're not building to the targets that you should? So I think it's an enabler, but one's also got to understand where there are limitations behind the data it kicks out.
So we've got a few more questions from people, and I'm going to hop about again. Do you think the job subsidy scheme will really be enough support for industries such as hospitality and events when they are already on their knees?
So for some, yes, but I'm not saying for 100% it will. For the reasons the Chancellor has set out, that very sadly, we're not in a position to save every single job, and for some people to be at home for even longer than the 8 months that the furlough already allows for. But the scheme was drawn up in consultation with business leaders and with trade unions. If you look at the comments of business leaders following what the Chancellor set out in his winter plan, they were very clear that the announcement would save hundreds of thousands of jobs. The furlough scheme itself has enabled, from a peak of 8.9 million people on it, more than half of those are now back in their previous job. So there's no question, and if people don't want to take my comment for it, they can just look at what business leaders from the CBI, the Federation of Small Business, the British Chamber, the chief execs of aerospace, given that, on a call with Heathrow, have said that these measures will make a material difference in saving jobs across these sectors. But people say they want politicians to be more candid, and the Chancellor and I are being candid with people in recognising it won't save all of those jobs. But the key point then is that we have skills and training in order to get people into other areas. And then we look at our commitments on things like net zero, our commitment to research and development and uplift. So 22 billion a year, so 70% cash increase in our R&D budget. That's a very significant opportunity. And it's important we then skill people up to take advantage of that instead.
Okay, and Charles L.G. Williams asks, how will current COVID borrowing affect defence investment and our ability to protect our global trade ambitions and meet current commitments more comfortably?
Yeah, I think firstly, we've got a very clear commitment in the manifesto. So the 0.5% increase, the 2% NATO, that's there as part of the manifesto. We've also recognised that the key is not just how much we're spending on defence, and again, from a NATO perspective, the UK's record is very strong, but it's also ensuring that spend evolves to reflect the national security threats as they move. So, for example, the Prime Minister chairs the National Space Council, looking at what are both the commercial opportunities in space, but also what are the defence requirements in space. So it is important that our defence spend evolves with those changing threats. That is why the Prime Minister set up the integrated review, which has been looking at that balance between things like space, cyber, which I think people now are much more aware of in terms of the risks that it poses, alongside our more conventional requirements, whether that be fighter jets or aircraft carriers and so forth. So we're very committed to the defence needs of the UK. We've been clear about that in the manifesto, and we've set up the integrated review to enable that to inform the spending decisions that we take.
Cool. And looking at other global matters, specifically to aviation, air freight, it represents a huge proportion of the UK's non-export value, with the majority of cargo travelling in belly-hold of passenger planes. Given that we're now cut off of our biggest, biggest single nation trading partner, the USA, how is the government planning to reopen that border?
Well, in terms of air freight, I think the conversation particularly flows vis-a-vis the relationship with Europe. And so firstly, will we have a trade arrangement in place, which Lord Frost, as per his statement last night, remains very clearly intention. And as he said in that statement, we've made good progress, but there's still on level playing field and fisheries some material outstanding issues. But our intention remains to have that trade agreement, and that therefore would cover on air freight. If that isn't in place, we would expect contingency arrangements to be put in place by the EU, and that's the nature of our understanding. Obviously, if those contingencies weren't put in place, then clearly we would then need to take measures on a bilateral basis with individual member states, but that's not our current expectation, and clearly the aim remains to have a trade deal, and things like air freight are a good illustration of why that is beneficial to both the EU and to the UK.
Do you think, it seems the UK is quite optimistic at the moment about a trade deal? I think Michael Gove was speaking about it the other day, saying that there's a lot of goodwill there. But the EU are very cross about the internal market bill and the parts of the withdrawal agreement being like overwritten. So even though infringement cases are quite common in the EU, they're saying that this one is of a different order. What do you think about these comments? Is this negotiating talk, or do you think that will compromise a deal?
Well, I come back to the fundamental point, and my conversations when I was Brexit Secretary always came back to the fact that both sides recognised it was in the interest of us both to have a trade deal. And when I was Brexit Secretary, there were plenty of times where there were disagreements and areas of contention. And you will get that in a negotiation. But I think one comes back to the point, and Lord Frost's statement was very clear on this last night, that actually they have made progress in a number of areas. One of the ones he drew out in his statement was on the security side. And that's a good illustration of why it's in both sides' interests to have a deal, because on areas like security, it is better that we work together. Your last question was on the issue of air freight. So we are committed as a government to seeking a deal, but it has to be one at the same time. And Conservative members, quite rightly, would remind us otherwise, that it has to be one that protects the sovereignty of the United Kingdom, and therefore doesn't go beyond what is reasonable within a free trade agreement. And that's the balance that David and Michael and the team negotiating it have struck. I think it's a reasonable balance, and it's one I hope will be reflected in the end outcome.
Okay, so you sound fairly confident that we're going to get a deal.
Well, I'm not in the negotiating room now, so the point is it's for those that are to comment. Often there's a gap between where things are in the room and where some of the public commentary is outside. I know that from my time in the EU existing department. So it's for Lord Frost really to give the update as to where we are and what the prospect of a deal is or otherwise. And I simply refer to the statement he put out yesterday, so therefore very current, based on the most recent round of negotiations, where David said that actually there had been good progress. He named security as one of those, but at the same time he said, particularly on fisheries, the EU still needs to move some way. And again, I think, as someone who's been in the Conservative Party, for 25 years, I know for our members, protecting the rights of our fishing fleet is of huge importance, and it's something I, growing up next to the sea, myself share. And I think the team is very right to focus on that, and it's important we address it.
Okay, and obviously another part of the negotiations back home, and I wondered what kind of how do you think the internal market bill will get on in the Lords?
Well, I think it's not really for me to speculate on their lordships in terms of what amendments they may wish or not to make. What I would point to is the fact that the UK internal market was passed with a very large majority in the House of Commons. And I recall when I was Brexit Secretary, many debates in the House of Lords at a time when the House of Commons was voting against the government, in which the House of Lords was telling me that it was really important to listen to the will of the House and to listen to what the decision of the House of Commons was. So I would hope that their lordships will be consistent in that, and given that the bill has passed with a very large majority, then I think the same arguments that they applied when considering the Ben amendment or the Cooper amendment when under the previous Prime Minister, I think many of those arguments are the same, that one should listen to the voice of the House of Commons. And I think on the Internal Markets Bill, it has spoken very clearly.
Okay, and Joe Biden was one of the biggest critics of the Internal Market Bill, and I wondered, so I had a question about, given the large the lead he has in the polls at the moment, what do you think our future, if he becomes president, what do you think the future relationship will look like?
Well, I think firstly, I think we all within the UK government will wish the president a speedy recovery. In terms of who the next president is and whether that is President Trump or President Biden, I think what has always been the case is that the UK government has very strong relationships, both at Prime Minister President level, but also administrations level. And as the Foreign Secretary said on his recent visit to Washington, where he met with the leadership of both parties, we have a very good working relationship with both. And I think we'll look forward to working with whoever the next president is. And I'm sure that they, as with their predecessors, will value the strategic relationship with the UK, just as we hugely value our strategic relationship with them.
And on moving on to the other trading relationships, what about, from all indications, New Zealand and Australia, that's moving on along quite nicely. What do you think about those deals, Karen?
Yeah, I think, it reinforces the fact that the UK is an attractive partner for trade deals. And I know from my own conversations with Australian ministers and New Zealand ministers that they are hugely keen to enter into trade deals. And I think it builds on a lot of work that's happened in recent years. When I was in a different role in the Treasury as Economic Secretary, we were doing a lot of work on fintech bridges, for example, with Australia. So there's a huge amount of work that's gone on over the years in terms of our close relationship. I think there's a common purpose in many areas. For example, through the Five Eyes security partnership, we work very closely with the Australian government. So I think the opportunity of a deal with Australia, the opportunity indeed with a deal with New Zealand, with Canada and others, is extremely strong. And I know that is something that Liz Truss is working extremely hard on. And I think the deal that has been reached with Japan is a good indication of the potential we have for more trade deals around the world.
Yeah, on Japan, how do you see that deal evolving? I mean, it was a fantastic deal, but it kind of got downplayed a bit in a way because people said it wasn't economically worthy enough. How do you envisage a future of our trading relationship?
Well, probably Charlotte got downplayed because it was good news. And in the context of Brexit, as I very well know, people have often wanted to talk down the opportunities of Brexit and the freedom that we get. And as someone who has always been a strong supporter of Brexit, the only person in the then Whip's office to back Brexit, I've always believed that we're a global trading nation, that countries around the world want to trade with the UK. And it's an opportunity for us to look beyond Europe and to be more international. And that's the vision I've always had for Brexit. And I think what we're now seeing is the evidence of that the deal with Japan, the interest that you say from Australia and New Zealand, the interest from many other countries around the world. And it allows us to build on the network of relationships that we have. For example, with countries such as India. And so I think there's huge opportunities for us through Global Britain. I think Japan is very much the start.
So do you think that Project Fear has been proven wrong? Because Project Fear would say, I saw from Ernst & Young that 7,500 financial services have moved from the UK to Europe. So what do you think about that?
Well, there'll always be some jobs that move, but there's also many that come into the UK, and we've seen some major companies consolidate their headquarters within the UK. I think what I would say from a finance point of view, which is that I think the opportunities of the capital markets in London, which are deep liquid markets, are hugely attractive. I think combined with a government that is pro-business and international in focus, that wants to have free trade deals around the world, I think that makes it extremely attractive to inward investment. It is important at the next fiscal event that we set out our longer term fiscal approach, reinforcing that wider economic message. But I think what we've seen in recent years is a number of major firms back London, and the opportunities we have, for example, just to take one in the tech sector, I think are huge. And so I think it's very exciting. And it's important that we don't fixate on the status quo areas and lose sight of the opportunity areas. And that may be on data and tech, it may be on space, it may be on green finance and net zero. There's lots of exciting new opportunities for the UK to seize. And we shouldn't only be talking about the current, we should also be looking to the future. And John was quite right in his introduction to be looking to the future in terms of some of the opportunities for aviation. And we're very keen to work with the aviation industry on that.
And I've got some more questions coming in. So one from Chris Calvert. Are the Treasury going to have to bring in austerity measures? I guess I've already sort of asked about this, but to get the country back on its feet financially once we have defeated COVID. So maybe something briefly about that. And then I'll do Nacho Moraes. In the long term, which do you expect the balance to be between debt issuance and taxation, and direct versus indirect taxes to fund the COVID deficit?
Yeah, so firstly, the Prime Minister has been clear on saying there won't be a return to austerity, and what we're doing is accelerating our infrastructure to open up those new jobs, to get the country building back better, and to ensure that we bounce back by retaining that link in the labour market between those who would have lost their jobs through initially the furlough, now the job support scheme and furlough bonus, so that businesses can fire back quicker and we recover as quickly as possible. In terms of the second question as to, well, to what extent, given the OBR forecast, will the economy, how long will it take to recover? What is the economic scarring as a consequence of COVID, and what is required from a tax spend borrowing perspective? Well, firstly, that's a question for the budget and for the Chancellor. But secondly, the reality is that will be shaped very much by the extent of any COVID flare-ups, whether we do have more restrictions at a local level, or whether through the measures that the public are responding to, being COVID safe, taking the necessary precautions, whether we're then able to limit the disruption from that. And obviously, as we go into what will be a difficult winter period, it's very hard to know what that position will be by January, February next year. We're doing everything we can to accelerate the vaccine, which is the key driver of recovery. But in the interim, we need to live with the vaccine, live with the virus, and it depends really how many MPIs we have between now and the vaccine coming on stream.
Okay, and Jeremy asks, rail is slow and expensive to build, but roads are cheaper and quicker. Will you support road infrastructure to create jobs and improve transport to grow the economy?
Yeah, well, through RIS2, we have a huge programme of investment in our roads. And in his interview last night, the Prime Minister was referring to a number of the road schemes from a union connectivity perspective. So we've already announced in the £5 billion announcement the week before the Plan for Jobs, when the Prime Minister announced the acceleration of £5 billion of infrastructure. That included road schemes. So, schemes, for example, one that people probably remember is Stonehenge, which has been talked about as a scheme for many years, and put in an investment there. So we're clear we are investing in our roads. There is a balance because we also have this wider commitment on net zero and a modal shift from car to rail, and particularly where you're able to put in electrification of rail. Clearly has sort of wider benefits as well. So there's a package of infrastructure, both on road and on rail, high speed 2 being the most visible of those, but we're committed to building back better, and that includes our road network.
Okay, and Alex Kenny asked, medical research is key for economic growth, but medical charities predict a 41% decrease in research spend this year. Will the government use the CSR to invest in R&D?
So firstly, we are investing in R&D. We're increasing it to 22 billion. So point one is there is a massive increase in R&D across the board. Then there's a question, to what extent would you use that R&D, for example, on some of the other topics, Charlotte, we've talked about. So starting with John's point on aviation, would you use R&D for that? Would you use it defence-wise, which was another question? So would you use it on areas like space? Or would you use it, as in this question, on the medical research side? But the key point is the government is investing significantly more in R&D. The opportunity on health is very significant because it is such a big driver of spend within government itself. So it is right that we're thinking about what is it we can do better? What is it that the NHS can innovate on? So perhaps the most cited example on innovation is around machine learning and the work that was done with DeepMind around, do you have a consultant looking at an eye scan, or are you able to train a machine that actually delivers a better result on that? And so there are opportunities linking particularly to our workforce, which is the biggest cost within the NHS. How do we use our R&D in order to deliver better for patients, but also do so in a way that is more sustainable?
Okay, and I'll make a call out as well. So we've got just over 15 minutes left. So if you would like to ask a question, anyone watching, please get them in now before the end of the session. So the next one is from Imran Shaukat, and they say, what are the provisions for our arts and theatre industry? Now, I understand that Oliver Dowden's delivered quite a big package, but perhaps you can explain a bit more about the ins and outs of it.
Well, he did. I mean, he announced a package of £1.57 billion. So that was a record investment within the arts sector, and that has been a key commitment from the government to support the arts, and we're obviously in discussion more widely with Oliver in terms of other sectors as well, such as sports, where our inability to bring spectators back on the 1st of October obviously is having an impact to many businesses within sport as well. But on the art side, alongside the 1.57 billion package of support, it is also worth remembering, and again this ties in with the marketing events industry, is the wider package of support also applies. So the furlough schemes, the self-employed income support scheme, the tax deferrals, the loans. So there's a wider package alongside the 1.57 billion that was allocated.
Okay, and what do you think? Because I've read personally that the nightlife industry is one part of the events industry that is feeling a bit neglected at the moment. What do you think that they're missing out compared to, say, other parts of the economy?
Well, as I say, all areas of the economy benefit from what is internationally one of the most comprehensive packages of support, Charlotte, that there is. So one needs to look at the package as a whole, not just individual measures. So it is the package around the grants, the 10,000, 25,000 grants, the loans, bounce back, CBILS, larger CBILS, the credit finance. It is the funding for our startup innovation firms. It's the business rates, deferrals, It's the time to grow announcement. So there's the whole package of support. Now, there are certain sectors, and again, it comes back to this point where the Chancellor is being very candid with people. There are certain sectors that we won't be able to save every job. But the question then is, for how long would someone be furloughed before those sectors were able to come back in the way that they were pre the virus? And in some sectors, that may be some considerable time. So it's not good for a worker to be furloughed indefinitely. It is right also for the taxpayer that we don't bear an indefinite cost in respect of that, and so that we recognise some sectors people can evolve. So I was looking the other day at a number of events which have gone online, and actually we're speaking on one in terms of a conference. So sectors are evolving. We saw with earlier in the summer the way that many restaurants moved and started doing some takeaways and started innovating. So sectors will innovate, but I don't pretend that innovation will address all of the pressures in terms of jobs. And we recognise the OBR forecasts on job losses, the Bank of England's August data likewise. So there will be pressure on that in particular sectors, but we've put in support for those jobs that are viable.
Okay, and Charlie Thomas, they say, as a student who has been bombarded with union strikes and limited teaching, is there going to be any package to help us, given I feel slightly neglected?
Well, some universities have been able to get back much more to normal. Others have had particular sort of outbreaks of infection. So that is something Gavin Williamson is engaging with the sector on. I think the wider point for us with universities is we don't want young people to be missing another year in terms of their education. It is important that we get people back into universities and able to study. It is then for the universities to look at how they're delivering those courses and ensuring that they're delivering value for money.
And surely you've heard the news about Northumbria. Do you think this is reason to panic, or are we going to see more of these sort of incidences over and over again?
Well, I think the wider approach is that there will be local flare-ups. We recognise that, and that is why Matt Hancock has put in place this tiered approach. And it's why, from a Treasury point of view, we recognise where there are particular local lockdowns, the additional support that we're putting to local authorities for their support, for comms, for communication with the community. But it's also, for example, the businesses affected in communities that have more severe restrictions, which is why we have the up to £1,500 for 3 weeks closure that I announced in the House a few weeks ago. So the point, Charlotte, is about whether it's in the university sector, the business sector, or elsewhere, what targeted support can we make, and having a phased approach rather than the lockdown that we saw in phase one.
And John Carr asks, any thoughts on funding deprived coastal area infrastructure to attract more of the home market to these areas?
Well, I'm not quite sure what he's meaning in terms of funding to support more. So is he driving at changes to procurement, or is he talking about housing policy?
I'm not sure either, but yeah, I guess any thoughts about, yes, he's written, any thoughts on funding deprived coastal area infrastructure to attract more of the home market to these areas?
So I think that there's several points within his question. So firstly, support for deprived areas is absolutely at the heart of the levelling up agenda. So one of the questions is which are the areas that keep missing out in support, and how do we ensure that we level up opportunity to areas where currently it's insufficient. So, as the Prime Minister has often said, talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. So where are there those pockets where we need to do more? And a big part of the review of the Green Book that we've been doing in the Treasury is to look at how well is it being applied? Is the guidance clear enough? What is it we need to do to change that, to ensure that those communities that are left behind actually get a fairer share of the cake. So firstly, we're looking at that both within Treasury and in the way bids, for example, for transport or for DCMS on let's say, community sports facilities and community hospital funding and so forth. We're looking at how we ensure that levels up in a fairer way than perhaps is the case at the moment. If he's driving at housing, then obviously one of the targeted measures we've done is the stamp duty reduction. So again, sectors have had particular support, but I think he's talking more from a leveling up perspective.
Okay, and am I right? There was a news story that Boris Johnson is offering fixed mortgages now for millennials and young people. I don't know if you saw that.
Well, I don't think the government offers fixed mortgage. It would be for the mortgage market to offer. But I think he's making a wider point, which is he has, and we as ministers have a very clear steer from him that we need to build back better. And we need to build with project speed at a quicker pace. And the challenge the Chancellor is leading on his behalf across government is how do we do that in a way that enables more younger people to get on the housing ladder? Because we as a party support people having that independence, having their own home. We need to build more to do so. And, I think that's what the Prime Minister's driving at. We then have the individual schemes within that, but that's the wider message.
Okay. And now moving on to a more seasonal item, we're coming up to Christmas. I just wondered, first of all, for travel, what are you expecting to see? We're hoping to get airport testing up and running. What are your hopes for Christmas? And on a wider point, are the Conservatives going to give people Christmas?
Well, with the comprehensive spending review to focus on in the coming weeks, so Christmas still feels some weeks away. But you're right, as part of our planning, then considerable thought, particularly in Department of Health and Transport and elsewhere, has been focused on that. And I think the key is that we do everything we can in the interim to get the virus down. And I think that's the best way that we can all enjoy Christmas with our families. And it requires all of us to play our part. And that's really at the heart of having this targeted approach that Matt Hancock has set out. So the key really between now and Christmas is to get the virus as low as possible, to ensure we're following the guidance, but then to respond with the modelling on what are the lessons learned. And I've given various examples during the course of our conversation as to where we can draw lessons from what is happening internationally, but also the experience we've had over the last 6 months, so that we can be much more targeted in what we apply as we go into Christmas.
Okay. Do you think, talking about the tiered system and the measures, do you think any of them are, like the R rate has been a bit criticised recently, and the traffic light system sort of came in at the beginning and then it went. I'm not sure I remember what 3 is anymore. Do you think some of these, they haven't really worked out, they've been kind of faded out now?
I think, well, again, we were at the start, we were told that the lockdown had been too severe because the comms had sort of almost over-communicated the risk. And so to some extent, for some people, it's too strong. For others, it's not strong enough. I think the point is that we trust the public to apply common sense. You can't have guidance for every single eventuality. And I think actually the public have responded heroically to what has been asked of them. I think the vast majority of people have reacted responsibly. I certainly see that in the businesses I visit that really have often at great speed put in place COVID secure measures. Businesses want to protect their staff, they want to protect their customers, they want to do the right thing. And that's certainly what I see when I go and visit businesses, that actually they've acted extremely responsibly. So we don't, as a government, need to be prescriptive about every single eventuality. I don't think that's our instincts as Conservatives. I think our instincts as Conservatives is to trust people. So we need to be clear on the risks and why measures are required, but actually then allow businesses to do what is right for their staff, for their customers. And I think the vast majority of businesses and the vast majority of the public have done exactly that.
Okay, but what about, because Boris Johnson, we talk about common sense, but Boris Johnson did say that a lot of the British public have been a bit complacent. What did you think about that?
Well, I think, as the Prime Minister has said, that I think the British public have responded, and particularly we saw with the first phase where people locked down to protect the NHS, and I think, as he said, there was a great response from the public. Now, clearly, as we go through summer and as the virus was lower, then people wonder whether it is necessary to perhaps take the same precautions as before, and the Chief Medical Officer has been very clear on what is required, and I think people respect that and respond to it. So I think there's been a very good response from the public.
Okay, and do you think how many lockdowns would you say we could have in total?
Well, we're trying to avoid, Charlotte, a lockdown. So I mean, the whole strategy is to avoid having a full lockdown. That's why we've got the tiered approach, is why we're taking the targeted measures, and with the support of the public, we can work together to ensure we don't need to have a full lockdown.
Cool. And I've got another aviation related question from Charlie Wooding. Will the government reduce the VAT for pilots in training in order to provide a stimulus for those wanting to gain entry in the aviation industry?
Well, I think, as a Treasury Minister, what I'd say is sounds like a budget submission, that there's a specific tax measure that someone is asking to be considered. The Secretary of State for Transport is particularly enthusiastic about the aviation sector, and I know will make the case very strongly for whatever measures are proportionately are beneficial to the sector, and I will discuss that with him as part of the CSR. But ultimately, if it's a tax measure, then it will be for the Chancellor of the budget.
Okay, and I have got a good question to come to an end on. With seeing that you're trying to cut so many costs in the Treasury, and obviously it's a time when people don't want to spend a lot of money, what do you think apparently unconscious bias training is going to cost the taxpayer? £700,000. Ben Bradley has said no to it.
Yeah.
Steve Barclay, will you be saying yes to it? And what do you think of this cost?
So, firstly, when you say we're cutting costs, at the moment we're spending rather a lot in the Treasury, but it is necessary for the COVID response.
Make things more efficient, looking at your auditing. Surely the taxpayer doesn't want to pay £700,000. So,
well, as to what spending is done within Parliament, that is a matter for the Speaker, not for ministers. So that programme is actually run through the Speaker, not from government. So it would be an issue for the Speaker to address.
Okay, but will you be undertaking unconscious bias training?
I have. I was actually on the same course as the Prime Minister. And a number of ministers. I have done a course as part of that, which was all about ensuring that uppermost in our minds is treating colleagues well, and I think that's a good thing. But at the same time, as to individual courses and concerns members have, members quite rightly will express their views. But as to which courses the House offers, that's for the Speaker.
Okay. Cool. So, we're coming to the end of this Q&A now. It's coming up to half past 10. So thank you for all those who came today. I hope it's been a very elucidating discussion. I know that I found it extremely interesting talking to Steve, and I'd like to thank you for your time and invaluable experience. I'd like to thank our partner Heathrow for making this event possible, and I hope that, so if you'd like to watch this event again or share it with friends, it'll be uploaded onto Conservative Home's YouTube channel. We hope you'll join us for our next event in partnership with Landsec. So that starts at 11 a.m, in which Mark Wallace, our Chief Executive, will be speaking to Robert Buckland, the Secretary of State for Justice, among other panellists, and they'll be talking about the role of responsible business in preventing offending and reoffending. So thank you so much, Steve. Have a great day. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks all.